Hi everybody, I'm Jack, the Rambling Raconteur, and this is part one of the responses to that 222 subscribers random number last week that I saw and tossed out a Q&A. And so I kind of got two types of responses. I got the, hey, this is sort of like a booktube channel, here are some questions around books. And then I got all of the other really fun, exciting questions. The book questions are all fantastic, but then there were all of the really the ones that make me remember who I am as a person, not just as a reader. So what I'm going to do is kind of split it up. This will be strictly like all those questions around books. Some people ask like 3 questions. One might be in this one, the other 2 in either tonight or tomorrow. I'll do one about all of the other exciting stuff. So without further ado, and thank you, by the way, to everybody. You're all wonderful people. Like, seriously. It's nice to be reminded of that at all times. So these are in no particular order. They're just questions. Here we go. And I apologize if I mess up anybody's name. Tobin Moffat asked, which Brontë sister is your favorite? Gold medal goes to Emily Brontë. I love Wuthering Heights. I realize it's like a bonkers text and that Heathcliff and Cathy Earnshaw, to a certain degree, we would never actually really want to encounter them in reality, but I've read Wuthering Heights I think 3 times, always fascinated by it, but I also really like her poetry. If you've never checked out Emily Bronte's poetry, I highly recommend that as well. It's it kind of reminds me a little bit of Emily Dickinson in terms of somebody who's clearly read the Bible many times, but has a very interesting individual take on it that just sort of streaks through the verse. Love it. Silver medal is Charlotte Brontë. I love Jane Eyre. I also love Wide Sargasso Sea, which is almost like a response text to Jane Eyre. I really love Jane Eyre, and that feels much stronger than her other books, just in my opinion. But I love Jane Eyre. And then the bronze medal, I'll give it to Anne Brontë. I've read Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I thought that was really interesting. I thought there were just some like really astonishing ideas in terms of the way that she crafted female characters and showed their intelligence in a way that I don't know we saw very frequently, certainly up to that point in literature, but even 100 years later we weren't seeing characters who exhibit intelligence in a particular way that she has. I think Anne Brontë oftentimes is kind of left to the side, but short of the absolute towering novelists of the 19th century, she's still a peak worth climbing. Absolutely. Didn't make the finals in that race. Branwell Brontë. You don't need to spend any time on his poetry. Prompt 2. Question 2. Andre Bernat, and I apologize for that name. Not my pronunciation of your name. Have you read the Brothers Karamazov? Yes, twice all the way through. Once in high school and then once in my late 20s. Loved it. What did you think of the Grand Inquisitor scene? I thought it was interesting. So when I first read it when I was 16, I thought like, whoa, like this is deep, and it was one of those, like I took advanced placement AP courses, where you could take a test or earn college credit in high school. And so I might have thought of myself as an intellectual. I don't really think of myself that way now. I certainly haven't for a long time. But it felt like, like you were a cut above the others if you read Dostoevsky, specifically Brothers Karamazov. And that scene was one that I would talk about with one of my teachers. He was student teaching actually at the time, and I infamously pulled a phone call, April Fool's prank on him, where I made him think that his student teaching internship work was under review at the local university. So after that, he didn't really talk to me much. Maybe he became the Grand Inquisitor. But I really was interested in the character of Ivan Karamazov when I was in high school and college. And then gradually as I got older, I think I gravitate a little bit more towards Alyosha, the third brother, in that book. But just an absolutely incredible book. Then he also asked, have you read Kafka's Parables, specifically Before the Law and the Emperor's Messenger? So Before the Law is included in the trial. Yes, that's a really interesting parable. It exists within the text of the trial, but it had previously been published separately as like a short story, and then within maybe a volume of stories, I believe, something like 10 years before the trial was published posthumously. And it's an interesting one where we're asked, and I'll probably like do something on the trial and before the law separately, but it's a very interesting take where we're given a person who wants to go in like to see the law, and there's a doorkeeper there and says, you can't go past me, I'm not going to let you through, and there's other doorkeepers and they're all bigger than me, I can't even look at the third one, you can't come through here right now. So the person sits there for years and finally asks, like, how come nobody else has ever come here? And the doorkeeper replies, well, this door was you were the only one who could go through this door. And it's like, wait a second, is he allowed to go through? Why wasn't he allowed to go through? And I think it just gets at the impenetrability that exists around so many structures, but also around our consciousness. Like, why do we think the way we think we do? So it's a fabulous little golden nugget within a very interesting novel. Emperor's Messenger. I think that might be in a book of stories I've read under a different title. Something about like the messenger to the Great Wall or something like that. And I can't remember that one because my volume of Kafka stories are at school and school's on lockdown still right now. But when I can acquire that, I'll take a look. Have I finished The Sleepwalkers? Not yet. I've been knee deep in modernism this year. But it is off the shelf. It's actually on my nightstand. It's ready to continue. I'm probably going to do... So I did the Romantic right at the beginning of the year. Probably going to do the Anarchist in the next 3 weeks. And I loved it. Question 3. The Codex Cantina. How do you look at choosing new books versus rereading? I firmly sit in the realm of involuntary memory. Like if you've ever read Proust, that's a big thing where there are things that stimulate my reading. I read a text and I read a fictional text and it makes a reference to another text. I want to go read that story or that article or something. Or there's a reference to a historical event and I'll go see do I have a volume that connects to that. And so I kind of do this spider web, connect the dots that just allows my mind to jump around. And it's part of why I'll read across different genres. In terms of rereading specifically, usually I reread if I'm really drawn to something, if I'm really, there's something about it that compels a reread. And then there are just certain writers I really enjoy reading, and so I read one of their works, about one a year, just cyclically. There's so much to read, there's more to read than I will ever read, so I just like to keep sampling. It's like the best buffet in the world. What literature, a Codex Cantina also asks, what literature are you most excited to share with my daughters when they're older? So for both of them together, this is my old paperback copy of Watership Down that is close to 30 years old now. It's the only book, sort of like the Bible, that I've read in every decade of my life. And when I read it in my 30s, it'll be with my kids, and I'm really excited to share that with them. It was my favorite book growing up, and it continues to be a book that I connect with, the text that I connect with. In terms of my younger daughter, so my younger daughter is like a spitfire. She's amazing. She's happy 99% of the time. I'm a fairly long person. My wife is 6 feet tall, so our kids, we're not worried about them ever being pushed around. But our younger daughter is somebody who can take care of herself. So she's younger. She plays with her older sister and her our older daughter and her older sister's friends. And sometimes they'll get a little rough, and she will just no, my slide. I'm doing this. Don't do that. No, not you, me. And she just will step right in, even though she's a little bit shorter because she's 2 years younger. So I'm interested in reading Wuthering Heights with her. Not because I think she's going to ever date someone like Heathcliff, but that she might be someone like Heathcliff, and I'm going to make sure that she's a kind person and a wise person and the wonderful person, because she's amazing. For my older daughter, so I joke about my younger daughter. My older daughter really likes Star Wars. And I'm really excited to read the Young Jedi Knights series that was published in like the later 1990s, maybe mid 1990s, with her. Even though, the expanded universe was closed by Disney. I'm excited to read that because she really likes Star Wars. She likes to pretend. We all pretend in our family a lot, but we have like lightsaber battles with, like paper towel rolls and things, or wrapping paper rolls, things like that. She enjoys Star Wars, so I think she'll enjoy the Young Jedi Knights series in a way that I did. And I also liked that series because it pushed out a pair of strong female characters in Star Wars, where a lot of times you had like Princess Leia, and then everybody else did everything cool, and Princess Leia in those books has a meeting. And periodically gets to do really amazing things, like in the Thrawn trilogy with the Nogri. But I like Jaina Solo and Tenel Ka as characters. I think they're really cool. I liked Jason Solo's character a lot, and so I'll be interested to read that with my older daughter. She has said that she loves Darth Vader and would like for him to be her prince. So hopefully the Young Jedi Knights can also dispel that myth. Timmy at Lost Cunningham asked, what's on your reading bucket list? So I have books that I intentionally have not read. I own them. I've owned them in some cases for 12, 13 years. And I don't read them because in many cases they are the last work I have to read by a writer that I really like. And I can have these experiences of reading the writer's other works for the first time and just being astounded and laughing and really enjoying it. So these I sort of keep as my strategic reserve of one day I'm going to get to a point where I want to have that experience, and I like aesthetically and emotionally need to have that experience, and that's when I'll dip into these. So Chapterhouse Dune by Frank Herbert, and again, please don't ever spoil these for me. Chapterhouse Dune by Frank Herbert. Light in August by William Faulkner. So again, these are books I've never read intentionally. The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Chandler. And then Flashman on the March by George MacDonald Fraser. And a couple of those are like the last book in the series, and then other by that writer. And then others are kind of just in the middle, and I didn't have a copy as I was reading through, and so I skipped it, and then I realized, I'm going to hold that off. There'll come a time when I read it. The other one is Travels in Alaska by John Muir. I enjoy Muir's nature writing and sort of pseudo-adventure writing, like real adventures, but that's not the focus, it's not the point. And I am waiting to read this until my wife and I can go actually to some of the Alaskan national parks, maybe Glacier Bay, maybe one of the other ones, but Wrangell St. Elias, or probably not Katmai, I don't want to, or maybe Gates of the Arctic or Denali, but I'll read this when we're like on the plane to that, or maybe a month before, because I usually plan like the activities and she plans the logistics. So those are books on my bucket list. There's also like all of these that I haven't read, but that's not with the same intention that I haven't read these ones. Next one, Alan Morton at the Book Traveler, 3 favorite fiction writers and why. I'm going to go with 3 who are still currently like writing fiction works. Marisha Pessl, who wrote Night Film, one of my favorite books from this century, the past 20 years. Astounding book. I really liked it. She wrote another book, something special topics in experimental physics, something like that, that's not as good. Night Film, I think, was her second book, and I loved it. My wife loved it. I'll be really interested in seeing what else she produces across her career. AS Byatt, who's like in her early 80s and may never publish another book, but Possession is very strong. I've read a couple of her other novels, but particularly her short stories. So I have a couple of volumes of her short stories, and I love those. They're like really scary and frightening a lot of the time, without being Baroque and highly graphic. They just like pinch on your spine. And then David Peace. This is GB84. I love his works. I've read probably maybe 6 of his books, 7, and I've really enjoyed every single one of them, and I look forward to kind of, being able to acquire the other books. He has a couple, The Damned United and Red or Dead, which I've never seen here in the U.S., but I'll find eventually. It took me 10 years to find The Sleepwalkers after I'd heard about it, so I'll find those eventually, and I'll read them, and I'll really enjoy those. And then 3 nonfiction that I really like. Stephen Jay Gould for Natural Science. I love his articles. I find that he is very funny. He makes interesting connections outside of biology and across sciences, which is very important. There's this whole segmentation of like people who only work within one aspect of science, and he pushes across from biology to geology, and really just connects. And I think that's a really important gift. Joan Didion's essays and books, nonfiction books, are astounding and brilliant, and they illuminate culture in ways that I need to think about. Even when I disagree with her, like I kind of need to think through those things, and so I love her nonfiction. And then my all-time favorite is Michael de Montaigne, his essays. They're like a great marathon coach. You just keep they keep hitting you in different ways and working different parts of your mind to, in my mind, help me develop and be a more whole person. Love them. Jen at Remembered Reads had 2 questions, so I'm going to answer one of them for this and the other in the other video. What's the strangest book you've ever read? The Ruined Map by Kobo Abe. This is a weird book. It was compared to the narrative suspense of Chandler, Raymond Chandler, with the surreal imagery of Kafka and the psychological acuity of Dostoevsky. Now, I don't know that it quite hits those 3 peaks, but it was weird. And I need to actually reread it. I was reading this when my current one, my wife, but then just someone I knew in college told me that she liked me, and that was probably almost as strange as what I was reading, because I had like hair down to here and all sorts of stuff. So anyways, The Ruined Map by Kobo Abe. Very strange book. David Murphy asks, what about your formative reading experiences? I think I just read like as much as I could growing up. I always wanted to participate in conversations with other people, whether it was family members or, adults, older students in school, teachers. Like I wanted to feel like I wasn't missing out on something. I was a very awkward person. And so part of my way of doing that was trying to just read as much as possible so that when I would hear things, I could just make a connection and naturally enter that conversation. Because I was a very awkward person. I still am. And so I read as much as possible. I read huge amounts of nonfiction. And I thought it was really interesting because the more I read, the more I learned. I loved like ancient history, starting from the Greek myths, but then pushing out to, eventually reading Herodotus and being like, this is really cool. And I was the American Civil War. There seemed like there were so many personalities, and later on I realized that some of that was like this hagiography that was inappropriate. But the American Civil War was very fascinating, and it just continues to build. I always think that history has this interesting aspect of if a writer can bring out the personalities behind historical figures, I really just can hook onto that. Even if I despise the personality, I can hook onto it and be like, wow, that's weird. Or, man, what a creep. And just like be interested in that. And so I think for me, it was, a lot of my formative reading experience was just nonfiction, and then National Geographic. So my father subscribed to National Geographics even when he was like younger. And so we just had copies. Like I read Peter Matheson articles that were written for National Geographic before I ever read The Snow Leopard or any of his books. And so I would just, go and pull a National Geographic and read one of the articles in it, and I really enjoyed that. And so I think that was a lot of my formative reading experience, was nonfiction, just giving me this base. And then I started reading fiction more seriously when I was in high school. And I was taking AP courses, and so I would kind of do the summer reading and just kind of read a bunch of different texts. And then that just continued from college and on. My wife's a reader, and so we like recommend books to each other and share books. And so, yeah, just again, it's a massive buffet, and I want to sample everything. Question 8, Winnie Lee. Top 3 favorite Russian writers and why? This is the point at which I will drop down to like 190 subscribers probably. Shots fired. And if it's Russian, it's like a duel. So, my favorite Russian novelist is Dostoevsky. So I have my copy of the Brothers Karamazov. I have a second copy in like a mass market that I read in high school, but this was my later copy. And this just fascinates me. I have 2 younger brothers, and so the fact that Fyodor Karamazov has 3 legitimate sons, pseudo spoiler alert, that was something I could connect to when I was in high school. I thought that was interesting. In college, I read Demons, and I think this is one that really opened a lot of eyes for me. So most people usually go with either Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment. Like, those are the 2 main routes for Dostoevsky. And then you have the like hipster who goes, no, The Idiot's the best work. And I don't think The Idiot is as strong as either Crime and Punishment or Brothers Karamazov. But this was something different. This I could never have anticipated what it would be like to read this book. And I read it through. I read it through the first time like in less than a week. And I was in college, and I really was interested in it. I was interested in the characters. I was interested in the way that he pits the generational conflicts that Turgenev had kind of presented in Fathers and Sons while doing a massive send-up of Turgenev. and then he just like lets it all stew and lets it all like push out. There's not the sense of redemption that exists in Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov to a large degree. This feels like a slightly bleaker work, and it just haunts you to a degree that the others don't. I think the others are almost inspirational. They'll haunt you, but they can still be inspirational. And Demons just seems to like drop. So Dostoevsky is my favorite novelist. My favorite short story writer. This was really tough. And I would say I'm going to not go with Chekhov because I think Chekhov is more universal and not necessarily like a Russian writer. I love Chekhov's stories. But the one who delights me is Gogol. So Gogol's stories, I've also read Dead Souls, but Gogol's stories just are weird and bizarre. And these could have been the strangest thing I'd ever read in another, lifetime. But they are so strange. The stories that are sort of more rural and provincial and kind of deal with Ukraine are wild. And I love them. And then the stories in the urban areas, in like St. Petersburg, are just as phenomenal and weird, and love Gogol. And then I've said this before, but my favorite Russian poet is Anna Akhmatova. It's absolutely staggering in terms of what she writes, the ways in which she writes, the themes she explores, and the connections and literary allusions she makes. Love her. Finally, these two sort of go together, and I wore this shirt to kind of, for these two. These are both questions about Arizona, and I'm going to make a subtle distinction on them. So, this incidentally is the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars, but the background is the state flag of Arizona. I don't know if they make these for other states in the U.S. or flags for countries or provinces or anything. I just think this is about as close as it gets to summing up, Jack is Star Wars and Arizona together. And my wife found this for me, and it is a favorite shirt of mine. So, the Arizona books. Jason at Byways in Bookland asks, is there a sell me on a book about or an author in Arizona? And I'm going to go with, for me, the Arizona writer is Tony Hillerman. So he's Navajo. He has a whole series of books set on the Navajo tribal nation, which is mostly in Arizona, but does extend over to New Mexico. So he has these detective books. They are sort of police procedurals set there on the Navajo tribal nation with the Navajo tribal police. He's got two main characters, and the older one is sort of more focused on like the police procedure and recognizing issues that face the Navajo people. The younger police officer is very much into like training to be a singer, a medicine man, while being a cop and while dating, you know, women who are not Navajo. And so he has this like this push and pull with his cultural identity that Hillerman explores in such a fascinating way. The first book, The Blessing Way, is a first novel, and so it's a little bit weaker. The second book, despite being amazing, is actually set mostly in New Mexico. So Jason, I'm going with Listening Woman, which is the third book, and the state police and FBI are baffled when an old man and a teenage girl are brutally murdered. The blind Navajo Listening Woman speaks of ghosts and of witches. But Lieutenant Leaphorn of the Navajo Tribal Police knows his people as well as he knows cold-blooded killers. His incredible investigation carries him from a dead man's secret to a kidnap scheme to a conspiracy that stretches back more than 100 years. Leaphorn arrives at the threshold of a solution and is greeted with the most violent confrontation of his career. And this is an astounding novel. It's a police procedural with incredible descriptions of a culture, of a landscape in northern Arizona, and of current issues from the 1970s and 1980s that faced Native Americans here in the U.S. Now, Brian at Bookish asks, what's your favorite book about Arizona? Well, that doesn't have to be the book that I'm selling Jason. And so I'm going to go with a Western, and that is Lauren D. Esselman's Bloody Season. This is the gunfight at the OK Corral in the Tombstone Legend, if as written in like an impressionist style. Like if you think of those impressionist paintings where you just get these pieces and you like the colors are there and you have to step back to see the whole picture, and that's what happens here. It has a pair of epigraphs, one from Mark Twain, "No weather will be found in this book. This is an attempt to pull a book through without weather," and one from Ernest Hemingway. There you go, Brian. "Remember to get the weather in your GD book. Weather is very important." And each chapter is a different character from that group. So some of them are members of the Cowboys, which was sort of like an almost organized crime outfit in southern Arizona. Others are from the different Earps. The first one is from Doc Holliday. And it starts with the morning of the gunfight at the OK Corral. These are the first two sentences. "He was dying faster than usual that morning, striping the sides of the dry sink with bloody sputum and shreds of shattered lung. His ears rang and his head felt hollow." And from there, we're going to get a gunfight. So that's my favorite book about Arizona. It's fast. So again, these were all the questions about like books and reading. And tonight or tomorrow, I'll be working through those other questions that absolutely delighted me, as did these. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to leave comments. Feel free to unsubscribe since I didn't mention Tolstoy. And love you all. Bye.